A single father takes his little girl out for a quiet dinner, but when two dangerous men corner a helpless woman, everything changes. With just 4 innocent words from his daughter, "Daddy, can we help her?" a moment of courage turns into a fight that will shock everyone in the restaurant. But what happens the very next day is something none of them could have imagined. Let's dive in. Smith sat at the corner of the little family restaurant, his posture slightly slouched but his smile warm as he watched his daughter across the table. Marie, just 7 years old, had cheeks dusted with freckles and eyes too bright for the tired world her father carried on his shoulders. She giggled mischievously as she dipped a French fry into a puddle of ketchup and leaned forward, insisting he take a bite. "Open wide, Daddy," she commanded, her small hand wobbling as she aimed the fry at his mouth. Smith leaned in obediently, letting the fry nearly smear his chin before snapping it between his teeth, pretending it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. Marie clapped her hands and laughed so loudly that 2 waitresses behind the counter looked over, smiling at the simple purity of the moment. For Smith, these dinners were not just about food, they were lifelines. He worked long days and longer nights, juggling 2 jobs that left him drained, but here, with Marie, the exhaustion melted away. The warm glow of the restaurant lights reflected in her eyes, making her look even more like the child who gave his life meaning after his wife's passing. Every smile of hers was worth more than any paycheck, any overtime shift, any promotion he had turned down. Smith reached for his coffee, taking a slow sip, letting the bitter warmth ground him in the sweetness of the moment. Across from him, Marie wiggled in her seat, humming a tune only she knew, swinging her legs beneath the table and rhythm. The restaurant itself was a small, cozy place. Red checkered tablecloths, wooden chairs slightly worn from years of use, and the smell of fried food mixed with coffee brewing in the back. It was a haven, a little world away from the worries that always sat heavy on Smith's shoulders. Marie leaned closer, whispering as if sharing a secret. "Daddy, can we come here every Friday?" Smith nodded, his lips curving softly. "Every Friday, Peanut. That's our deal." Her grin widened, toothy and pure, as though he had just promised her the moon. He looked at her, memorizing every detail of the moment. The ketchup at the corner of her lips, the way her braids had loosened from running on the playground earlier, the way her presence reminded him he wasn't entirely alone. The restaurant buzzed quietly around them with families, couples, and the occasional solo diner staring into their phones. A waitress passed their table and winked at Marie, setting down an extra packet of ketchup. Marie gasped dramatically, whispering to her father, "See? They know I love ketchup more than anyone." Smith chuckled, ruffling her hair, grateful that she still carried the innocence of childhood, unshaken by the harder truths of life he shielded her from. For a moment, everything felt safe, too safe. Smith caught himself glancing toward the door, a reflex he had never shaken since becoming both father and mother. His instincts had grown sharper over the years, like a shield forged from necessity. He brushed it off, telling himself he was overthinking. Tonight was just dinner, nothing more, but a small knot of unease tugged at the back of his mind, unexplainable yet insistent. Marie interrupted his thoughts by poking another fry toward him, demanding his attention. "More, Daddy. You have to try it with 3 dips this time," she giggled, carefully swirling the fry in ketchup. Smith leaned forward, did again, pretending to groan dramatically at the thought of eating yet another messy fry. Marie's laughter bubbled out like a melody, drawing glances from the nearby tables, but no one seemed to mind. The little girl's joy was contagious, filling the air with something lighter than the clinking of dishes or the buzz of conversation. Smith let himself soak in the sound, breathing in the gift of normalcy. How rare it was, he thought, to have moments where nothing demanded fixing, nothing threatened to fall apart. The walls of the restaurant seemed to cocoon them in warmth, as if sealing away the outside world. Marie licked her fingers dramatically, earning a raised eyebrow from her father before wiping her hands on the napkin with exaggerated care. "Don't tell Grandma I did that," she whispered conspiratorially, and Smith let out a soft laugh. It was in these small exchanges he found pieces of the life he thought he'd lost forever. He studied her for a moment longer, his heart swelling with gratitude. The world was unkind, but Marie was proof that light could survive even the darkest storms. Outside the restaurant window, the night air pressed against the glass, city lights flickering faintly in the distance. Inside, warmth and laughter formed their own little world. The hum of conversation carried around them, footsteps echoing as the door opened and closed for new arrivals. A couple argued quietly at a booth across the room, their words muffled but their tension obvious. A group of teenagers near the jukebox laughed too loudly, the sound clashing against the restaurant's calm background music. Life continued in ordinary ways all around them, unaware that in moments, ordinary would shatter. Smith leaned back, sighing contentedly, ready to tell Marie about his favorite Friday tradition from when he was a boy. But before the words left his mouth, a sudden gust of cold air swept into the restaurant. The door had slammed open so hard that the little bell above it clanged violently. Conversation stilled for just a moment, heads turning toward the entrance. Smith's hand instinctively tightened around his coffee cup, though he told himself it was probably just someone in a hurry. Marie paused mid-bite, her wide eyes shifting toward the doorway, ketchup still smeared on her fry. The laughter that had filled the space just seconds earlier seemed to fade into a low murmur. The couple arguing went silent, their attention snapping toward the sound. Even the teenagers by the jukebox froze, the music suddenly too loud against the hush. Smith's gaze followed everyone else's, his breath catching in his chest, though he didn't yet know why. Something had changed. The air, the energy, the safety of their little bubble. Marie tugged on his sleeve without looking away from the door, whispering, "Daddy?" Smith placed a steady hand on hers, forcing a calm he didn't feel. His instincts screamed louder this time, sharper, heavier. The ordinary evening was gone, replaced by something darker, something coming straight through that open door. And though Smith couldn't yet see the shape of it, he knew this was the moment everything was about to change. The door stood wide open, letting the chill of the night seep into the restaurant. Two men stepped inside, their presence immediately unsettling, as though they carried the storm in with them. Their clothes were rough, leather jackets worn and scarred, boots heavy against the floor. Conversations that had started to resume after the slam died again as eyes followed them. Smith's grip on his coffee cup tightened, his instincts on edge. He had seen men like this before, men who didn't come to eat, but to take. Marie shifted nervously in her seat, pressing closer to him as though she too sensed the shift in the air. The taller of the two scanned the room with sharp, hungry eyes, while the other muttered something under his breath, his smirk curling in a way that chilled the space. Then, without hesitation, I moved toward the bar. Smith followed their path with his eyes, his stomach twisting. There, sitting alone, was a young woman in her late 20s, her back straight, but her hands trembling around. Her purse. Her long, wavy hair framed her face, but her lowered gaze betrayed the fear she tried to mask. Smith saw it before anyone else did, the way the men flanked her, boxing her in like predators cornering prey. One leaned close, his words low but sharp enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Stay quiet, and no one gets hurt." The woman froze, her breath catching as she gripped her purse even tighter, knuckles white. Her eyes darted once toward the door, calculating escape, but they blocked every path. Smith's pulse quickened. He looked around the room, hoping someone else might stand up, someone braver, stronger, unafraid of what this could turn into. But no one moved. The couple across the room looked away, pretending not to notice. The teenagers by the jukebox whispered, but stayed rooted to their seats. Even the waitresses stiffened behind the counter, unsure whether to intervene or call for help. Marie's tiny hand tugged at his sleeve, her wide eyes searching his face. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough to pierce the thick silence. "Daddy, can we help her?" Her words sliced through his hesitation like a blade, stripping away the thin excuse of waiting for someone else. Smith turned his gaze back to the woman. Her lips quivered, but she said nothing, her terror almost too heavy to let her breathe. The taller man pressed closer, his arm brushing against hers, his smirk widening. Smith felt his body tense, every instinct roaring to life, but he looked down first, at Marie. Her little face was full of innocence and trust, yet her eyes brimmed with something else too, belief. Belief that her father could do anything. Smith swallowed hard, the decision settling inside him like iron. He pushed back his chair slowly, the scrape of wood against the floor drawing a few startled glances. Marie held her breath, clutching the edge of the table as too afraid to let go. The two men barely noticed him at first, too focused on their target. But when Smith took a step forward, his frame casting a shadow across the woman, their heads snapped toward him. The taller one sneered, his expression dripping with contempt. "What's this? Janitor thinks he's a hero?" Laughter, low and cruel, rolled off their tongues. Smith didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes locked on the woman. then shifted briefly to his daughter behind him, as if to anchor himself in what mattered most. The woman's lips parted, shock flickering across her face as she realized this stranger was stepping between her and danger. Smith's body became her shield, his stance calm but unyielding. The restaurant had fallen into a heavy silence again, the tension thick enough to choke on. Marie whispered from behind the table, just loud enough for her father to hear. "Be careful, Daddy." Smith squared his shoulders, his voice low, steady, unshaken. "You're going to leave her alone." The taller man chuckled darkly, exchanging a glance with his companion. "Or what?" he taunted, leaning forward as though daring Smith to make a move. The shorter one cracked his knuckles, his grin wide and mocking. The woman's breath came quicker now, her eyes darting between the two men and the quiet man who had chosen to stand for her. Smith didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't back down. He simply stood, solid, unwavering, unafraid. The taller man's smile faded, just slightly, as though something about Smith's calm unsettled him. The woman gripped her purse tighter, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Smith said nothing more, but his silence carried weight, an unspoken warning. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching, unsure what would happen next. Marie's small voice echoed in his mind, steady and innocent. "Daddy, can we help her?" And in that moment, there was no turning back. Smith's body shifted just slightly, enough to show that he was ready to act, ready to protect, ready to fight if he had to. The taller man narrowed his eyes, his smirk gone now, replaced with irritation. The shorter one stepped forward, his grin sharp, his fists clenched. The woman gasped, her chair scraping the floor as she tried to pull back, but there was nowhere left to go. The restaurant's silence was broken only by the thud of boots against the floor as the men squared up to Smith. Marie's breath hitched behind the table, her tiny fingers gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. And Smith, calm, steady, unshaken, took one final step forward, placing himself fully between danger and the woman whose life was trembling in the balance. Smith's body stood like an immovable wall between the trembling woman and the two men whose sneers carried poison, his calm gaze unshaken even as their mocking laughter cut through the heavy silence of the restaurant. Marie crouched behind the table, her little hands gripping the edge with all her might, her whispered plea floating into the air like a fragile prayer. "Be careful, Daddy." The taller man, anger flashing across his face, lunged without warning, his fists swinging wide as though he expected Smith to stumble, to falter, to break under the weight of his aggression. But Smith moved with sharp precision, his hand shooting out to seize the man's arm, twisting it so quickly and firmly that the sound of strained muscle cracked through the tension. In a single motion, he sent the attacker crashing to the floor with a thud that rattled the nearby tables. Gasps rippled through the room, but before the echo of the fall could fade, the second man charged forward, fury etched across his features. Smith braced himself, his stance steady, his eyes narrowing not with rage but with purpose. He had no desire for violence, only the will to protect. As the second man's fist sliced through the air, Smith stepped aside with measured control, countering with a swift, clean strike that sent the man stumbling backward into a chair, his breath knocked from him in a choked grunt. The restaurant held its breath, the silence punctuated only by the clatter of the chair collapsing beneath the man's weight. The woman, still clutching her purse like it was the only thing tethering her to safety, pressed a trembling hand to her lips, her wide eyes locked on the figure who had placed himself between her and the danger that moments ago felt unstoppable. Whispers stirred in the corners of the room, hushed voices carrying disbelief, awe, and a growing sense of respect. Marie, unable to stay hidden a second longer, bolted from behind the table and wrapped her tiny arms around her father's leg, pressing her cheek against him as though he were her shield, her fortress. Smith lowered a hand, briefly squeezing her shoulder in silent reassurance, his eyes never leaving the fallen men as they groaned and struggled to recover. The taller one pushed himself halfway up from the floor, his glare burning with humiliation. But he hesitated, unsettled by the quiet strength radiating from the man he had dismissed as nothing more than a janitor. The shorter one wiped blood from the corner of his lip, his smirk gone, replaced with frustration that trembled on the edge of fear. The woman's tears finally spilled, streaming down her cheeks as gratitude swelled in her chest, a gratitude too heavy for words, a gratitude she feared she might never fully repay. Still, the air remained thick with uncertainty, because though Smith had gained the upper hand, Danger still crouched in the shadows of the two men's pride, waiting for its chance to strike back. Marie's voice quivered as she whispered again, "Daddy, don't let them hurt you," and her plea only deepened the fire in his resolve. Around the restaurant, the crowd seemed frozen in place, torn between fear of escalating iron and admiration for the man who had chosen to stand tall when no one else would. The attackers locked eyes with each other, silent communication sparking between them, and in that unspoken exchange, the atmosphere shifted once more, leaving everyone bracing for what might come next. Smith barely slept that night, the images of the fight replaying in his mind like an endless loop. The crack of bone, the crash of a chair, the sharp breaths of fear from the woman he had protected. Even after the attackers had been hauled away by the police, the weight of the night lingered heavy on his shoulders. Marie had fallen asleep in his arms on the way home, her small head resting against his chest, her innocence unshaken by the darkness she had witnessed, but Smith's heart carried the echoes. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if stepping forward had been the right choice, or if he had painted a target on their quiet little lives. By morning, the city looked unchanged. But Smith felt different. He rose before the alarm, moving quietly so Marie could sleep a little longer. Her backpack was waiting by the door, lunch neatly packed the night before. He brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen, grounding him for the day ahead. When Marie appeared in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes and smiling drowsily, Smith's worries softened for just a moment. She was his reason for everything. The reason he fought, the reason he endured, the reason he kept standing even when the world tried to push him down. The walk to school was brisk, the crisp air biting against their cheeks, and Marie chattered about a drawing she wanted to show her teacher, her little boots tapping against the pavement. Smith listened, nodding, his mind half in her world and half caught in the shadows of last night. As they neared the school gates, his eyes scanned the area automatically. A habit, a reflex. Parents stood in clusters, children rushed inside with backpacks bouncing, and the usual hum of morning chatter filled the air. Then he saw her. Standing just outside the gate, her posture both strong and hesitant, was the woman from last night, Veena. The name slipped into his mind before she even spoke it, as though he had already known it somehow. She wore a tailored coat that hinted at her professional life, but her eyes betrayed sleepless hours, a lingering vulnerability beneath the surface. When her gaze met his, it was soft, almost searching, as if she wasn't sure whether to step forward or turn away. Marie spotted her before Smith could react, tugging at his hand, her voice bright. "Daddy, it's her, the lady from the restaurant!" Her words carried excitement, not fear, her innocence already framing Veena as part of their world. Smith hesitated, his steps slowing, but Veena closed the distance herself, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady but threaded with emotion. She crouched down to meet Marie's wide-eyed stare, her expression melting into warmth. "Your daddy is a hero. He saved my life." Marie's face lit up with pride, her little chest puffing out as she looked from Veena to her father. "I told you, my daddy can do anything," she declared, her voice carrying louder than she meant it to, earning a few curious glances from other parents nearby. Smith shifted uncomfortably, unused to such praise, especially in public. He wasn't a man who sought attention. He preferred to blend into the background, to carry his burdens quietly. But Veena's eyes lingered on him, studying the weariness etched into his face, the strength hidden beneath the humility. She didn't look at him like the others did, not as just another tired man in old clothes. She looked at him as though she had seen the truth of him, and it unsettled him more than the fight itself. Marie giggled, reaching for Veena's hand without hesitation, and to Smith's surprise, Veena took it, her fingers trembling only slightly before settling into the child. His grasp. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried weight, as if Marie had already decided where Veena belonged. Smith cleared his throat, his voice low. "You didn't have to come here." Veena straightened, her gaze meeting his again. "Yes, I did," she replied softly. "I needed to thank you, properly." Her words carried more than gratitude. There was something unspoken beneath them, something fragile yet undeniable. The school bell rang, breaking the moment, pulling Marie's attention toward the gate. She hugged her father quickly before skipping off, her backpack bouncing as she disappeared into the flow of children. But before she went, she looked back once, waving at Veena as though cementing a connection. Smith and Veena stood in the quiet that followed, surrounded by the morning rush but somehow set apart from it. Veena's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes still held shadows. "Last night, she began, hesitating as though searching for the right words. "I thought no one would help me. And then you did. You didn't even know me. But you—" Her voice trailed off, breaking under the weight of the memory. Smith shifted, uneasy, but he didn't look away. Anyone would have stepped in. Her smile deepened, tinged with something like disbelief. "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. Most people looked away, but you stood up." There was silence again. But it wasn't empty. It was charged, filled with the beginnings of something neither of them could quite name. A bond forged in fear, but quietly reshaping itself into something else. Something gentler. Something that might grow, if either of them dared to let it. Smith finally exhaled, running a hand across his jaw. He wanted to walk away, to keep his world small and safe, but the way Veena looked at him made it impossible to retreat fully. It wasn't just gratitude in her eyes, it was recognition, the kind that saw beyond walls and defenses. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, both knew the truth. What began as a rescue was no longer just about survival. It was becoming something more. An unspoken bond. Fragile but undeniable, hanging in the morning air like a question neither was ready to answer. The silence after their parting at the school gate lingered with Smith long into the day. Veena's words echoed in his mind. Not anyone, but you stood up. It wasn't the kind of praise he was used to. Life had taught him to keep his head down, to endure quietly, to survive without drawing attention. Yet for the first time, someone had looked at him not with pity, not with dismissal, but with something that felt dangerously close to admiration. And that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Over the days that followed, Veena found reasons to cross paths with them again. Sometimes it was at the school gate, where Marie would rush into her waiting arms with the easy trust only children carried. Other times, it was by chance in the small grocery store near their block, where Veena insisted on helping Smith carry his heavy bags despite his quiet protests. Slowly, what had begun as gratitude began to shift into something deeper, something neither of them wanted to name too quickly. Smith watched cautiously at first. He had been burned before, abandoned when life became too heavy, left to raise Marie alone with nothing but his calloused hands and quiet resolve. His world had grown small by necessity, shaped only for himself and his little girl. Yet with Veena's presence, cracks began to form in those walls. He caught himself listening for her voice, noticing the faint perfume she wore, and thinking about the softness in her eyes when she looked at Marie. Marie, of course, sensed it all before he did. Children often saw truths that adults hid from themselves. She began drawing pictures at school, 3 figures holding hands under the sun. When Smith asked, she only grinned and said, "That's us? Daddy, me, and Miss Veena." He tried to brush it off, but the warmth in her smile and the quiet hope in her words dug deeper than he let on. One evening, Veena joined them for dinner in their modest apartment. The table was small, the dishes simple, pasta and garlic bread, but laughter filled the spaces that had long been silent. Marie talked endlessly, her words tumbling over one another as she told stories from school, and Veena listened as though every word was precious. Smith sat back for a moment, just watching, his daughter glowing, the sound of laughter bouncing off the faded walls, and Veena, so elegant yet unpretentious, fitting into their lives like she had always been meant to. After dinner, while Marie worked on a drawing at the table, Smith and Veena stepped outside for air. The city night was cool, carrying the hum of distant traffic. They walked side by side, close but not touching, their silence comfortable. Then Veena's voice broke the quiet, soft and vulnerable. "Last night you saved me. But more than that, you reminded me what kindness feels like." Smith turned his head slightly, surprised by the fragility in her tone. She wasn't a woman easily broken. He could tell by the way she carried herself, shoulders straight, chin high, as if the world expected her to be untouchable. But tonight, her armor slipped, and as her hand gently brushed against his, then settled firmly into his, Smith felt his defenses falter. He wanted to speak, to say something meaningful, but words didn't come easily to him. He had always spoken more with actions than with promises. Yet in that simple touch, he felt something shift, something that told him he didn't have to carry every burden alone anymore. Marie, ever perceptive, looked up from her drawing as they returned inside. She saw their hands together and smiled, her eyes bright with an innocence that cut through every unspoken fear. "Daddy," she whispered with quiet certainty. "I told you she belongs with us." Smith's throat tightened, but he couldn't bring himself to correct her, because deep down he felt the truth of it too. Vina didn't just belong in their lives, she was becoming part of it. Air healing, their laughter, their future. In the weeks that followed, Vina became a constant presence. She joined them for walks in the park, where Marie raced ahead on the swings, calling for them to watch. She sat beside Smith at school events, cheering louder than anyone when Marie performed. And sometimes, when the nights grew long, she stayed just to talk, to share pieces of herself he hadn't expected her to reveal. She spoke of loneliness hidden beneath her success, of battles fought in silence, of wanting something more real than the polished life she had built. Smith listened, and though he was not a man of many words, his quiet understanding became the anchor she hadn't known she needed. In turn, her presence softened him, coaxing out laughter he had long buried, reminding him that life could be more than survival. One night, as they walked home together after a long day, Marie skipping a few steps ahead, Vina slowed her pace. The street lamps cast a warm glow on her face as she turned to him. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost," she murmured. "Hope, and a family I never imagined I could have." Smith swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing against the walls he still carried. But when Marie turned back, her eyes sparkling as she reached for both of their hands, Smith finally let those walls crumble, their fingers intertwined, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man standing alone against the world. Love had not entered their lives through grand gestures or sweeping promises. It had come quietly, woven through shared meals, whispered truths, and the laughter of a little girl who believed her daddy could do anything. And in that quiet, steady love, Smith found something he had never dared to hope for again, a new beginning. As Marie squeezed their hands, her voice rang out with the same words that had started it all, Innos, sent yet powerful enough to change everything. "Daddy, can we help her?" This time Smith didn't hesitate. He looked at Vina, her eyes shining with tears, and something far stronger than gratitude, and answered softly, firmly, with the weight of a man finally choosing to let life back in. "Yes," he whispered, "we already are." And in that moment, beneath the city lights and the watchful stars, their broken lives knit together, not through chance, not through rescue alone, but through courage, kindness, and love strong enough to build a future they could finally call their own. And that's how one single act of bravery not only saved a stranger's life, but also opened the door to love, healing, and a brand new beginning for Smith, Marie, and Vina. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart-Woven Tales for more emotional stories that remind us of the power of love and kindness.